third time to read some more tales of H.P. Lovecraft. Last time we read The Alchemist and The Doom, and I think today we are starting off with Dagon. I am recording this a bit earlier in the day. Usually I record in the evening, and you may notice the camera, the lighting seems a bit lighter and there's less red. Usually you kind of see here there's a red lighting, which is just the wallpaper from my computer screen, which makes some kind of nice ambience, I guess. I think it looks good, but you can't really see it at the moment because of the daylight. But with that, we shall start the first story of this reading. I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable. I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners. So liberal indeed was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the evening vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awaked, it was to discover myself half-sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished, for there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid, with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other less describable things, which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime, yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions which for innumerable millions of years have lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, strain my ears as I might. Nor were there any sea fowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness, and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for travelling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odour of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though the object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it. By the fourth evening I had attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance, an intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had determined me at sunset. scrutiny filled me with sensations as I cannot express, for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions, and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I had ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things, which are known to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Dora. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were strewn disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage to some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bueller, they were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background, for one of the creatures was strewn in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe, some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then suddenly I saw it, with only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface. The thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, polyphemus-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to a certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then, of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm some time after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard the peals of thunder and other tones which nature utters only the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated entheologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god, but soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night especially, when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sunstricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless thing that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols, and carving their own detestable likeness on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of the day when they may rise above the billows to drag down in their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind, of a day when the land shall sink, and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand, the window, the window. So that was the end of Dagon. A very short one, as are some of the next few. We have A Reminiscence of Dr. Samuel Johnson. The privilege of reminiscence, however rambling or tiresome, is one generally allowed to the very aged. Indeed, 'tis frequently by means of such recollections that the obscure occurrences of history and the lesser anecdotes of the great are transmitted to posterity. Though many of my readers have at times observed and remarked a sort of antique flow in my style of writing, it hath pleased me to pass amongst the members of this generation as a young man, giving out the fiction that I was born in 1890 in America. I am now, however, resolved to unburthen myself of a secret which I have hitherto kept through dread of incredulity, and to impart to the public a true knowledge of my long years, in order to gratify their taste for authentic information of an age with whose famous personages I was on familiar terms. Be it then known that I was born on the family estate in Devonshire on the 10th day of August, 1690, or in the New Georgian style of reckoning, the 20th of August. Being therefore now in my 228th year, coming early to London, I saw as a child many of the celebrated men of King William's reign, including the lamented Mr. Dryden, who sat gloss over my youth for the present. I had first knowledge of the Doctor in May of the year 1738, though I did not at that time meet him. Mr. Pope had just completed his epilogue to his satires, the piece beginning, "Not twice a 12-month you appear in print," and had arranged for its publication. On the very day it appeared, there was also published a satire in imitation of Juvenal, initialed London by the then unknown Johnson, and this so struck the town that many gentlemen of taste declared it was the work of a greater poet than Mr. Pope. Notwithstanding what some detractors have said of Mr. Pope's petty jealousy, he gave the verses of his new rival no small praise, and having learned through Mr. Richardson who the poet was, told me that Mr. Johnson would soon be deterred. I had no personal acquaintance with the Doctor till 1763, when I was presented to him at the Mitre Tavern by Mr. James Boswell, a young Scotchman of excellent family and great learning, but small wit, whose metrical effusions I had sometimes revised. Dr. Johnson, as I beheld him, was a full, pursy man, very ill-dressed and slovenly aspect. I recall him to have worn a bushy bob-wig, untied and without powder, and much too small for his head. His clothes were a rusty brown, much wrinkled, and with more than one button missing. His face, too full to be handsome, was likewise marred by the effects of some scrofulous disorder, and his head was continually rolling about in a sort of convulsive way. Of this infirmity, indeed, I had known before, having heard of it from Mr. Pope, who took the trouble to make particular inquiries. Being nearly 73, full 19 years older than Dr. Johnson, I say doctor, though his degree came not till 2 years afterward, I naturally expected him to have some regard for my age, and therefore not in that fear of him which others confessed. On my asking him what he thought of my favourable notice of his dictionary, The Londoner, my periodical paper, he said, "Sir, I possess no recollection of having pursued your paper, and have not a great interest in the opinions of the less thoughtful part of mankind." Being more than a little piqued at the incivility of one whose celebrity made me solicitous of his apprehension, I ventured to retaliate in kind, and told him I was surprised that a man of sense should judge the faultfulness of one whose productions he admitted never having read. "Why, sir," replied Johnson, "I do not require to become familiar with a man's writings in order to esteem the superficiality of his attainments, when he plainly shews it by his eagerness to mention his own productions in the first question he puts to me." Having thus become friends, we conversed on many matters. When, to agree with him, I said I was distrustful of the authenticity of Ossian's poems, Mr. Johnson said, "That, sir, does not do your understanding particularly credit, for what all the town is sensible of is no great discovery for a Grub Street critic to make. You might as well say you have a strong suspicion that Milton wrote Paradise Lost." I thereafter saw Johnson very frequently, most often at meetings of the Literary Club, which was founded the next year by the Doctor, together with Mr. Burke, the parliamentary orator, Mr. Beauclerk, a gentleman of fashion, Mr. Langton, a pious man and captain of militia, Sir J. Reynolds, the widely known painter, Dr. Goldsmith, the prose and poetic writer, Dr. Nugent, father-in-law to Mr. Burke, Sir John dissensions and disruptions I observe in the literary and amateur press associations of today. This tranquillity was the more remarkable because we had amongst us gentlemen of very opposed opinions. Dr. Johnson and I, as well as many others, were high Tories, whilst Mr. Burke was a Whig and against the American War, many of his speeches on that subject having been widely published. The least congenial member was one of the founders, Sir John Hawkins, who hath since written many misrepresentations of our society. Sir John, an eccentric fellow, once declined to pay his part of the reckoning of supper, because 'twas his custom at home to eat no supper. Later he insulted Mr. Burke in so intolerable of a manner that we all took pains to show our disapproval, after which incident he came no more to our meetings. However, he never openly fell out with the doctor, and was the executor of his will, though Mr. Boswell and others have reason to question the genuineness of his attachment. Other and later members of the club were Mr. David Garrick, the actor and early friend of Dr. Johnson, Messrs. Tho and Joes Wharton, and Dr. Adam Smith, Dr. Percy, author of the Relics, Mr. Edward Gibson, the historian, Dr. Burney, the musician, Mr. Malone, the critic, and Mr. Boswell. Mr. Garrick obtained attendance only with difficulty, for the doctor, notwithstanding his great friendship, was ever affecting to decry the stage, and all things connected with it. Johnson indeed had a most singular habit of speaking for Davy when others were against him, and of arguing against him when others were for him. I have no doubt that he sincerely loved Mr. Garrick, for he never alluded to him as he did to food. He was a very coarse fellow, despite his comic genius. Mr. Gibbon was none too well liked, for he had an odious sneering way, which offended even those of us who most admired his historical productions. Mr. Goldsmith, a little man very vain of his dress, was very deficient in brilliancy of conversation, was my particularly favourite, since I was equally unable to shine in the discourse. He was vastly jealous of Dr. Johnson, though none the less liking and respecting him. I remember that once a foreigner, a German, I think, was in our company, and that whilst Goldsmith was speaking, he observed the doctor preparing to utter something. Unconsciously looking upon Goldsmith as a mere encumbrance when compared to the greater man, the foreigner bluntly interrupted him, and incurred his lasting hostility by crying, "Hush, Dr. Johnson is going to speak." In this luminous company I was tolerated more because of my years than for my wit or learning, being no match at all for the rest. My friendship for the celebrated Monsieur Voltaire was ever a cause of annoyance to the doctor, who was deeply orthodox, and who used to say of the French philosopher, "For est acroremi ingenii et vulgarium literarium." Mr. Boswell, a little teasing fellow, whom I had known for some time previously, used to make sport of my awkward manners and old-fashioned wig and clothes. Once coming in a little the worse for wine, to which he was addicted, he endeavoured to lampoon me by means of an impromptu inverse. "Right Mrs. Williams, there are scarce 2 lines which are not the Doctor's. At one time Johnson recited to me some lines by a servant to the Duke of Leeds, which had so amused him that he had got them by heart. They are on the Duke's wedding, and so much resemble in quality the work of other and more recent poetic dunces, that I cannot forbear copying them. When the Duke of Leeds shall married be to a fine young lady of high quality, how happy will that gentlewoman be in his Grace of Leeds' good company. I asked the Doctor if he had ever tried making sense of this piece, and upon his saying he had not, I amused myself with the following amendment of it. When gallant Leeds auspiciously shall wed the virtuous fair of ancient lineage bred, how must the maid rejoice with conscious pride to win so great a husband to her side. On shewing this to Dr. Johnson, he said, Sir, you have straightened out the feet, but you have put neither wit nor poetry into the lines. It would have afforded me gratification to tell more of my experience with Dr. Johnson and his circle of wits, but I'm an old man and easily fatigued. I seem to ramble along without much logic or continuity when I endeavour to recall the past, and fear I light upon but few incidents which others have not before discussed. Should my present recollections meet with favour, I might later set down some further anecdotes of old times, of which I am the only survivor. I recall many things of Sam Johnson and his club, having kept up my membership in the latter long after the Doctor's death, at which I sincerely mourned. I remember how John Burgoyne, the General, whose dramatic and poetical works were printed after his death, was blackballed by 3 votes, probably because of his unfortunate defeat in the American War at Saratoga. Poor John, his son fared better, I think, and was made a baronet, but I am very tired. I am old, very old, and it is time for my afternoon nap. So there is a small short story, perhaps maybe to some one of the lesser interesting ones, but I think the writing style is very interesting. The purposeful misspellings that you might have noticed. I was struggling, but I think I did well. I think we shall be doing 3 today, since these are very short compared to the last 2. So we will continue on here with Polaris. Into the north window of my chamber glows the pole star with uncanny light. All through the long hellish hours of blackness it shines there, and in the autumn of the year, when the winds from the north curse and whine, and the red-leaved trees of the swamp mutter things to one another, in the small hours of the morning, under the horned waning moon, I sit by the casement and watch that star. Down from the heights reels the glittering Cassiopeia, as the hours wear on, while Charles Wayne which strives to convey some strange message, yet recalls nothing save that it once had a message to convey. Sometimes when it is cloudy, I can sleep. Well do I remember the night of the great aurora, when over the swamp played the shocking coruscations of the demon light, after the beams became clouds, and then I slept. And it was under a horned waning moon that I saw the city for the first time. Still and somnolent did it lie, on a strange plateau in the hall betwixt strange peaks. Of ghastly marble were its walls and towers, its columns, domes, and pavements. In the marble streets were marble pillars, the upper parts of which were carven into the images of grave bearded men. The air was warm and stirred not, and overhead, scarce 10 degrees from the zenith, glowed that watching pole star. Long did I gaze on the city, but the day came not, when the red Aldebaran, which blinked low in the sky but never set, had crawled a quarter of the way around the horizon. I saw light and motion in the houses and the streets. Forms strangely robed, but once noble and familiar, walked abroad, and under the horned waning moon, men talked wisdom in a tongue which I understood, though it was unlike any language I had ever known. And when the red Aldebaran had crawled more than halfway around the horizon, there were again darkness and silence. When I awaked, I was not as I had been. Upon my memory was graven the vision of the city, and within my soul had arisen another and vaguer recollection, of whose nature I was not then certain. Thereafter, on the cloudy nights when I could sleep, I saw the city often, sometimes under that horned waning moon, and sometimes under the hot yellow rays of a sun which did not set, but which wheeled low around the horizon. And on the clear nights of the pole star leered as never before. Gradually I came to wonder what might be my place in that city on the strange plateau betwixt strange peaks. At first content to view the scene as an all-observant, uncorporeal presence, I now desired to define my relation to it, and to speak my mind amongst the grave men who conversed each day in the public squares. I said to myself, this is no dream, for by what means can I prove the greater reality of that other life in the house of stone and brick south of the sinister swamp, and the cemetery on the low hillock, where the pole star appears into my north window each night? One night, as I listened to the discourse in the large square containing many statues, I felt the change, and perceived that I had at last a bodily form. Nor was I a stranger in the streets of Olatho, which lies on the plateau of Sarkis, betwixt the peaks Noton and Gedifonek. It was my friend Halos who spoke, sustain the traditions of their ancestors, who went forced to move southward from Zobna before the advance of the Great Ice Sheet, even as our descendants must someday flee from the land of Lomar, valiantly and victoriously swept aside the hairy, long-armed cannibal no-feckers that stood in their way. To me, Alos denied Oria's bard, for I was feeble and given to strange faintings when subjected to stress and hardship, but my eyes were the keenest in the city, despite the long hours I gave each day to the study of the Negotic manuscripts and the wisdom of the Subnarian fathers. So my father, desiring not to doom me to inaction, rewarded me with that duty, which was second to nothing in importance. To the watchtower of Thapnan he sent me, there to serve as the eyes of our army. Should the Inutos attempt to gain the citadel by the narrow pass behind the peak Noton, and thereby surprise the garrison, I was to give the signal to fire, which would warn the waiting soldiers and save the town from immediate disaster. Alone I mounted the tower, for every man of stout body was needed in the passes below. My brain was sore dazed from excitement and fatigue, for I had not slept in many days, yet was my purpose firm, for I loved my native land of Lomar and the marble city of Olatho that lies betwixt the peaks of Noton and Caliphoneg. But as I stood in the tower's topmost chamber, I beheld the horned waning moon, red and sinister, quivering through the vapours that offered over the distant valley of Panov, and through an opening in the roof glittered the pale pole star, fluttering as if alive, and leering like a fiend and tempter. Methought its spirit whispered evil counsel, soothing me to traitorous somnolence, with a damnable rhythmical promise, which it repeated over and over. Slumber watcher, till the spheres, 26,000 years, have resolved, and I return to the spot where now I burn. Other stars anon shall rise to the axis of the skies, stars that soothe and stars that bless, with a sweet forgetfulness. Only when my round is o'er, shall the past disturb thy door. Vainly I did struggle with my drowsiness, seeking to connect these strange words with some more of the skies which I had learnt from the Negotic manuscripts. My head, heavy and reeling, dropped to my breast, and when I next looked up, it was in a dream, with a pole star grinning at me through a window from over the horrible swaying trees of a dream swamp, and I am still dreaming. In my shame and despair I sometimes scream frantically, begging the dream creatures around me to waken me ere the Inutos steal up the pass behind the peak Noton and take the citadel by surprise. But these creatures are demons, for they laugh at me and tell me I am not dreaming. They mock me whilst I sleep, and whilst the squat yellow foe may be creeping silently upon us. I have failed in my duty and betrayed the marble city of Olatho. I have proven false to Alos, my friend and commander, but still these shadows of my dream deride me. They say there is no land of Lomar, save in my nocturnal imaginings, that in those realms where the pole star shines high and red Aldebaran crawls low around the horizon, there has been naught save ice and snow for thousands of years, and never a man save squat yellow creatures, blighted by the cold, whom they call Eskimo. And as I writhe in my